Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working on chapter 11 tonight. The topic is multimedia and interactivity. This is really an exciting chapter, actually. I think one of the more exciting ones in the book, because I'm kind of partial to the multimedia arts, generally speaking. I also almost forgot to do this PowerPoint tonight because I started working on chapter 10 and not realizing, oh, we don't go from 9 to 10 to 11. I go from 9 to 11 and back to 10 on purpose in this class, just so you guys know it's not accidental. I think the flow of the topics is better. What we're going to be learning here tonight is how multimedia works on the web, because it's different than working on a standard computer system. There's a lot more nuances to it. It has gotten significantly easier, since I first learned how to add audio or video to a web page. I will tell you. So we're going to learn about some of the basic concepts that go with it. We're going to learn about some, extra CSS features, a little bit of talk about JavaScript and jQuery and stuff, and then how to do interactive menus and stuff. I don't really demonstrate that because I don't feel that it's really necessary at this level, but I do talk about it. So we will look at all of these different things and also some of the new features basically that were added to HTML5, because so this is like for us now, HTML5 has been around for 10 years officially, right, as the standard. And really what's happened is it should have been on version 6 already, but for whatever reason they're not changing the version number. They're just adding the features to HTML5. But when HTML5 first came out, we added, like, you can see some of these like weird topics here: geolocation, web storage, manifest, service workers, and canvas, which are really powerful APIs that make the web do a lot of stuff magically that, prior to it coming out was really difficult to do. Google has been one of those companies that has been very forward thinking about this, and they adopted a lot of HTML5 stuff almost 10 years before it was officially a standard. And they're adopting it as part of the reason why it kind of got pushed to the forefront so quickly. All right. When we start to put multimedia on the web, and when I say multimedia, I'm thinking particularly of audio and video, right? And we take this for granted, right? Because we hop up on Facebook, we go out on YouTube, every website we hit, there's music playing, there's videos, there's TikToks, etc. Right? And so this has become a very normal part of the web now, and it really works much better than it used to. One of the old problems that we used to have is prior to HTML5, not all the browsers work the same with media files. So, for example, and this is really strange, MP3s kind of came into the mix partially because they were a lot more convenient to stream and push over the web because the file sizes were really, really small. However, not all the browsers played them. And if you had, for example, if I used Google Chrome like 15 years ago, I could play an MP3 in it. But if I used Firefox or Safari, I couldn't. And if I used Internet Explorer, that would play WAV files and Windows Media files, but wouldn't play the other ones. It's like it was really goofy. And so you'd have to write all this weird custom code. And some of that legacy still remains. But I'm going to give you some best practices here, by the way, for kind of working around those issues as we kind of move forward. So what's happened in HTML5, and because all the modern browsers now support it, is most of the major file formats will automatically play in all browsers, right? However, right, so here's the however, and I want you guys to be aware of this website here. There's a website out there called Can I Use, right, which is designed, as you can see here, just from the little Google link, right, that if you're using HTML5 and CSS3, this will tell you both for HTML tags and CSS tags does it work in all browsers? So for example, if I type video, right, this is going to show you the video tag that we're about to learn and what type of support it has across all the browsers and its versions, right? And you'll notice as you go back to like really old versions like this, right, from 2006, it was not supported with Firefox, for example, right? And this, I think this is a very handy chart, right? By the way, this website, like if you're looking at any tag that's brand new, and you can see all the browsers do support stuff. Any of the ones that are not fully green, you want to look at, right? I want you to notice that some browsers, even modern ones, have issues with some tags, right? So you have to read up, like if you're planning on pushing to Safari on an iPhone, there are some issues with audio and video, by the way, right? And it's not Apple's fault. It's really kind of how their browser is structured. There's other tags you can put in here. So for example, like there's a brand new HTML tag called picture, right? I want you to notice that's fairly new, but it's actually pretty well supported. The browsers that don't support it are the ones that are retired, like Internet Explorer, or Opera Mini, which I think you see on phones sometimes, right? But generally, that tag is supported. It's not really part of HTML5. It's part of the draft version of 6, right? So that's the whole can I use website. You can also put CSS tags in here, by the way. So like if you were to look at like, one of the things that we'll look at tonight. All right, and it's not even coming up. All right, well, all right, and I'm not sure why it's not like pulling it up, but anyhow, all right. But you can test your tags in this format. And so you can just type them in and it'll find them. They have some things that are kind of brand new to HTML that are just kind of on the rise right now. So some of the things we even lectured on, like Flexbox and the CSS grid, right? You can see a lot of people are looking those up. So like how well is Flexbox supported, right? You can see there, or how well CSS grid is supported. And generally you'll see, most of them will support things. We also have the WebP image format. That's pretty well supported too. And these all become containers basically that we use when we're building our web pages. And that's why it's important. In the old days where we had a lot of browser conflicts, man, you had to check that website all the time. Does it work at this browser? Does it work with that browser? And you have to adjust how you're operating, based upon that. So let me get back to the right PowerPoint here. All right, so let's start talking about audio files and file formats. And these are some of the per the author, some of the common formats for audio files, right? Now, anybody who might be a musician or audiophile, or you do like home recording or anything like that, and a lot of people do that stuff these days, you'll recognize a lot of these file formats, right? And some of them you won't, and that's okay. The ones I think that most of you might recognize are something like the WAV file, which is an uncompressed audio file on the Windows platform, or the AF format, which is more popular on Macintosh. We also have the MP3 format, and I would generally say MP3 is probably the easiest one to put on the web, right? For a number of different reasons. There's also the M4A, and that's the one that's native to iTunes. So like when you are streaming stuff off of iTunes, or you put it on your iPod or your iPhone or whatever, M4A is the thing. And I want you to notice that this MP3 is MPEG 1 layer 3, and this is MPEG 4. So it's basically the same technology, but Apple uses the next level up, right? So it's really a goofy format, right? It's not, I wouldn't call it industry standard, but it is on Apple, right? These other weird ones that you see here, I would say that this one's basically irrelevant because it's so old, but there are some files out there like that, uncompressed Unix sound files. Very unusual for any of you to even ever encounter them. And then you have this weird OGG format, which is the newer open source format that's kind of, they were hoping would be universal, never really caught on, frankly. But it does have some really interesting features to it because OGG is intertwined with this other technology called FLAC, which allows you to take audio files, highly compress them for delivery, and then fully decompress them back to their full resolution, right? MP3 doesn't do that. MP3 and M4A, by the way, are both notorious for downgrading the quality of your audio files so much that it really loses a lot. And okay, people who don't have a very discerning ear would not be able to notice, but people who are like musicians or sound engineers, I have a very hard time listening to MP3s that are encoded at a low bit rate because I hear the low end being summed to mono, and I hear the breakup of the high end as they try to approximate it digitally, right? There's a lot that's lost with MP3s. So if you're ever dealing with MP3s or M4As and you're actually encoding them, encode at the highest bit rate you possibly can. That's my advice, right? If you want good sound quality. Otherwise, you go to WAV files. And there is this modern push, by the way, that WAV files, at least like the old school ones, which I think are 16-bit 44.1K, right, are not detailed enough for true high quality audio, right? And anybody who does audio recording will usually prefer to go at much higher bit rates. So not 44.1 like a CD is encoded, but they'll go up to 48K or 96K or now 192K if your equipment can handle doing it. And the difference is basically how it's all put together. So I'm going to do something kind of strange here. Is I'm going to put in a blank PowerPoint, not because I want to create a new slide, because I kind of want to use it as a whiteboard, frankly. And I'm going to do just a little bit of drawing here to kind of explain a couple things about audio that you may or may not find interesting. But basically, if I was to take an audio file and look at it on a spectroscope, and I had an analog audio signal. So for example, my voice by its very nature is analog. I'm creating sound waves, and those sound waves, when I project them, kind of have these like smooth wave forms, like that they form like this, right? And there's an infinite amount of detail in those waveforms, right? When we switched to digital technology, we were forced to take those, let's say like this is a waveform, we were forced to take the waveforms, and instead of allowing them to exist in their natural state, we were then forced to take snapshots of the audio, both in time and in amplitude, right? So this is like where you get the two different bit rate things, right? And when we say 44.1 kilohertz is the sample rate of a CD, that means we're taking 44,100 snapshots of the sound every second. And then we're using that to approximate what the analog waveform is. When we switch to MP3s, that bit rate and those snapshots drop significantly, right? And that's why MP3 can sound very harsh and brittle and don't sound as good as a CD. It's basically, that's why. It's like when you're streaming stuff off your phone, you're usually getting pretty low quality audio, by the way. A lot of people don't even realize it. What is also fascinating, though, is that there's this push in a lot of ways to kind of move back to like the analog details. So it'd be kind of interesting to see where this all ends up. You even see a lot of like major musicians now go back to recording on tape, because there's more low end, goofy stuff like that. All right. As far as what file formats you should use for audio on a web page, I'm going to say MP3 is the choice. The rest of these are also usable in browsers, but I don't typically recommend them because of the size of the files they create. MP3s will work most universally. And then we have this other one, which is the MIDI file format, which isn't really an audio file at all, but a set of instructions to play the hardware synthesizer on your sound card to make music, right? That's kind of a weird file format. I also don't typically recommend that on a website. All right. Now, when we switch over to looking at video files, we have a different collection of file formats to look at. There are some weird ones on here that, once again, I don't think that you're probably ever going to use, but the author mentions them, so I'm going to talk about them a little bit. Now, as far as like the go-to format for the web, okay, so this is where you'll get some opinions. I'm going to say the default go-to format for the web is MP4 for video, right? There are others. One of the others that they don't have on this list that I really like is a file format called MKV, which is based on the Matroska, and I'm not sure if I'm even saying that correct, compression algorithm, which is this guy from Russia that developed it. And basically, it is higher quality video, but highly compressed, and the playback is really good, right? And often when I'm maybe not so legally downloading video content from the internet, like through BitTorrent or something, that's the file format I go to. But otherwise, MP4 is kind of a good choice. When you start looking at the different platforms, though, AVI is kind of a good one if you want high quality. You have this new one, which is a AV1. This is a new one that's kind of a generic. I do not see a lot of people using this, by the way, but this is one of the new open source technologies. The OGG format also exists for video. Once again, not highly adopted. Then we have the old WMV, which is the old Windows video format, really not super heavily used anymore either. Still supported though. MPEG is what full resolution, high quality digital video really truly resides in. So like if you were, publishing a movie, right, and you want it in 4K, that kind of thing, that's your format. That's the full motion picture format for both audio and video. It supports a whole bunch of different technologies, but it does lead to incredibly large file sizes. We're talking like, I don't know, 8 gigs for a movie, with audio and 5.1 audio and 4K and all that kind of stuff, right? Maybe even more, So the other one that I have seen kind of on the rise, and this is kind of an interesting one, is the WebM format, which is kind of like the equivalent. You guys remember when we looked at the WebP format for pictures, where it's kind of like it'll hold really any of the supported file types within it, and it's supposed to be like the new generic format. So this exists for web too. I have started seeing a few videos coming out like this, or if you go to certain download services, like for example, if you go to like Vimeo, I think, and you try to download a video, that's one of the formats they give you. And that one actually works pretty well on the web. It supports both high quality and high compression, right? All right. So when we want to actually get some audio on our webpage, well, here's some code. Let me get into code mode though, because I haven't like kind of prepped myself. So we're gonna do kind of the standard thing we normally do. I'm gonna bring up Dreamweaver to get my editing engine going. I'm gonna bring up my file folder. We are still working in Unit 8, so I'm gonna stay in my Unit 8 folder. If I even did that, I never even made a Unit 8. Okay, well, no, we're still in Unit 7. I'm going to correct myself. We're not to Unit 8 yet. So I don't need to make a new folder here, but I do need to find a place within my file structure where I think this is going to work. Okay, so that's going to involve me actually looking at my website in the browser. So I'm going to come in here and of course it's on the other screen, and I'm going to load up the current version of my website. And you should open up your current version too. All right, so let's bring up the home page. And I don't think I want it there. I don't think I want it there. Maybe it goes on the whatever page. I think I want to put it on the whatever page. We don't have a gallery page yet, or I could make a media page. I could do that. Why don't I do that? Let's make a media page. So I'm going to come into Dreamweaver here. I'm going to basically prepare myself to do this work. The one page that I have that's probably super generic I can copy is the whatever page. So I'm going to make a copy of that, and then I'm going to paste it back in, and then I'm going to rename it. And I'm going to call this media. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up, and then I'm going to strip all the other code out of the main body section here. I'm going to leave the H2 at the top so I can change the title. So getting rid of everything in the main container, basically. Here, we'll call this media page. That works for me. And I'm going to save this. Now, one thing we're going to have to do is we have to add this to the menu for the website. So I'm going to copy one of these tags here in my nav, and I'm going to change this to media. And then I'm going to change that to media. And then I'm going to take this line of code, and then I'm going to add it to all my other pages. So if you guys are, in the habit of trying to keep your pages consistent, this is what you need to do, right? So my navigation can be consistent. So there it is on the contact page. Let's put it on the about page, the home page, which is index. I don't need it on the thank you page. Well, maybe I do, right? Well, that's got a menu too, so I should put it there. Whatever page. And the media page already has it. Did I miss anything? I had my test page, but that's just a blank page. Okay. So now that I've made the changes to all the pages, I'm going to go up to my file menu and choose save all, right? So I changed each page, but now I'm making sure that all of them are updated. I'm going to close the ones that I'm not working on, just so I'm not kind of confusing myself. And now I have a blank spot to work. All right, so now I can go work with that code. So let's go ahead and grab the sample code. I'm just going to grab it right from the PowerPoint slide. And what they're showing you here is probably the most primitive way to add audio to a web page. And I would truly say that this is not really adding audio to a web page. It's adding a link to audio on your web page. But I'm going to add this here. And then I'm also going to kind of look at the fact that, oh, wait a second, I don't have this MP3 file, right? So now you're in like a kind of a different scenario. When you guys do work on the case study for this chapter, they do provide the audio and video files. I'm kind of tempted to maybe use one of those, but I'm going to go here to the browser, go to my solutions page, right? And you'll notice that here are the zip files for all the case studies. So for example, if you want to add like the guitar music for the Java Jam case study, you'll notice that there's MP3s and OGs inside here for Greg, and I think for Melanie, she's got an OG and an MP3, and I'll just go ahead and play it so you can hear it. And yeah, that's fine. Just once though. Right. So if you want an MP3 file to work with, if you don't have one, there's an option for you, right? Now, I don't need to download one like that because, guess what? I have a ton of them. In fact, I'm trying to think of like probably my most efficient way to get some of my music here that I can just pull up. So I don't know what you guys are into hearing, but I can just try to find something bizarre. I was on the way home, which is why I was late.
I'm down for country.
Oh yeah, that's not going to happen. Sorry, Matthew. only if it's Hank
Here's for
Williams.
trying.
No, I'm totally teasing. It has to, for me, it has to be the right country music. I'm just saying. But I'm looking at. We were listening to Radiohead as I was driving home, and I'm tempted to maybe use one of their songs, and I'm not sure if it's on the Bends. Yeah. All right. So this is what I was listening to on the way home. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy it from my D drive over to my folder where I do my work. So I'm going into my Prometheus C account. Right. You guys see me navigating right to my project. And the other tip that I have for you, right, is when you start working with media files, because it's easy to amass a whole bunch of them, like your images, I think it's a really good idea to create a folder for media, right? You can call it music, you can call it media, you can call it video, you can call it whatever, you know. My standards, I usually just call it media because that covers both audio and video, right? That's my thinking. So now I have the folder, I'm pasting in the file, and then I'm looking at the file name, right? And I don't know if you guys, how well you can see this, but this is named so that when I load it up onto like my phone or like a music player, like in my car or something, that the tracks will play in the right order. So they're numbered that way, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in here and rename this. And my goal is actually to remove all the spaces. And if you like, you know, if you don't like, you know, the way it looks that way, you can always do dashes instead. But I'm going to kind of do this to it. I'm just removing the spaces because it makes for cleaner links. And it also ensures that it'll work well on whatever web server you put it on. I will have you notice that the MP3 file does have both upper and lowercase letters in it, right? So that's important when we add the link. Now, here's another trick I'm going to give you. Now, I could go back to my coding engine and I could just try to remember, like, what was that called? Like Radiohead, Fake Plastic Trees, MP3, or something like that. And then if I just misspell one character, one upper lowercase is off, or one dash is missing, it's not going to work, right? So what I'm going to do then is, instead of guessing and typing it in or whatever, I usually, this is one trick that I recommend a lot to people when they're, you know, like copying file names and they want them to link correctly, is go to the file, right click, rename, select all, and then copy that, right? Because then when I go to my coding engine and drop it in, it's exactly correct. You know, there's no, that's not even a guess, right? Because I copied it right from the file system. Now, the other issue here, though, is with this link, this is in my media folder, so I have to go media slash and then the MP3 file. There is a title tag on this, so I am going to kind of put the song in here. Right, and probably should make that the text that's linkable as well. Now, I'm just going to reiterate here, what we are creating is basically just a regular link to the media file, but this is to kind of prove a point. So now that I have it saved, right, I just did a Control S. I'm going to go back to my browser and I'm going to reload my website here. There should be a new menu entry for media. And as I go there, you can see I have a primitive looking link here, but I'm going to go ahead and click it to show you what happens. The green plastic watering can. And the point here isn't the music, right? And we could all share a favorite music for sure. The point is to show you that when you drop a link to an MP3 file, it will link to it. This is kind of cool. And what does it do? It loads up the internal HTML5 audio player automatically, right? I didn't code this. This is just built into HTML. And this is, by the way, I want you to keep in mind, 10 years ago, it was officially added. Google was using it a little bit earlier than that. And this is really kind of fantastic because I got play and pause. It's got a little timer. It's got a timeline so I can like move around the song. It's got a volume control. It also has a little menu here. I can control the playback speed. Like, holy cow, right? And I didn't code any of it, right? Kind of neat. This is kind of ugly though, right? That you have to click a link and then it goes to a separate page, but it is doable, right? So it is a way that you can propagate music to your website in a very, very simple way. The other thing that you can do with this is, because this links to an MP3 file, I can also right click and save link as and download it. So in that capacity, the link is kind of cool. I think, right? Because like if you're sharing music with somebody and you put together a web page, you want to give them samples of, I don't know, music you've created, you can create simple little links like that. You don't have to give them the whole song, but they can right click, download, check it out, right? And then hear it on their car stereo or whatever they want to do. Right. So that's the most simplistic approach to adding audio, right? So just a link to the file that contains the audio, it automatically invokes the HTML5 audio player. Right. Let's go back to the PowerPoint now. You'll notice that the author does some interesting stuff here. So like one use, and I think this is probably a pretty intuitive use for this. Like if you were a podcaster and you had a website and you had a bunch of podcasts that you just let people download, that might be a great way to let them download it. And then notice he's also providing a transcript to it. So like the words, if you would, right? They show you that, whatever browser you're using, the audio player will automatically load. I think what's interesting about this is when they captured this image, this was kind of a new tag, and that's what the old audio player in HTML5 looked like. Still the same basic features, by the way, but it has evolved since that first screenshot that they did. Another approach is to use the audio tag. And this one is a little bit more convoluted. And I want you to study this up a little bit first before you go wholeheartedly copying it. And you'll notice I'm actually zooming out on this, which is kind of a strange thing to do. But the reason I do it is because I think the code's a little bit easier to read when you zoom out because the lines aren't wrapping, right? This approach, we use instead the audio tag, and the audio tag gives us some other capabilities that using a link doesn't give us, right? It'll still invoke the audio player, but instead of going to a separate page to see it, it will be native on the same page, right? So that's the one positive. If you want to give the people in or on the web page access to the controls of the audio, you can toggle the controls on by just adding the controls attribute. Now you can do this two ways. You can do it the way that they're showing. You can say controls equal controls, or you can just use the word controls, by the way. The controls appear by default, by the way, but not all of them, right? So this gives you the full set of tools. The other interesting thing about the audio tag is that it allows you to do what we call fallbacks. Okay, so in terms of propagating stuff to the web, a fallback is basically when you give people one primary file you want them to listen to. So in this case, an MP3 file, right? That's the one we really want to play automatically. But what if they're on some like really weird mobile browser that doesn't support MP3 for whatever reason, then you have a fallback. So if the first file doesn't load, then this file will load. OGG is, it's another one of those weird formats, but it's supposed to be universal. It's supposed to work in every browser. So that's one of the reasons it's a good fallback. The problem is most people don't know how to even encode OGG files. However, with MP3s, a lot of our ripping software, and I don't know if you guys ever did that when you were younger. It's like take a CD, you put it in your computer, and you could rip the audio from it, right? And you turn it into MP3s or M4As or whatever. But when you did that process, often you would create WAV files, instead of MP3s. WAV files, I think, are a good fallback. They're higher res and they're much larger. Now, we didn't really even talk about the aspect of like how large audio files are. And maybe I should just take a really quick moment to do that, because as I kind of think about that MP3 that I grabbed, right? And this is actually encoded at a fairly high bit rate. This song's almost 5 minutes long. And at the bit rate that it's encoded at, and I'm trying to get the properties here because it should say in the properties, the encoding rate. So the bit rate that I'm using is 320K. A lot of MP3s, by the way, usually encode at like 128K, like in that range, which is basically half the quality, because it's that many less snapshots per second of the audio in the digital encoding, right? And the less snapshots you take, the more crude your audio becomes. It becomes more, lo-fi is a polite way to say it. All right. So with this encoding rate, this 5-minute song ends up being uh, over 11 megabytes. That's a lot. That's a big file, right? Very different than if you look at like your HTML files, which are 3 kilobytes, or if you look at your images, which might also be sort of um, higher res here. I'm trying to get the different view mode here. Here we go. Details so we can see the file size. But even a large image for the web, like 4 megs, isn't quite the size of an audio file. Now, if I find an audio file that is actually not compressed, and I'm trying to think of if I can even find one here. And so I'm just going to do kind of a really goofy thing. So I apologize because I somewhere here I have like wave files I can pull up. All right, so here's some. All right, now of course it's empty. All right. Let's see here. These should be wave files. And really what I'm trying to show you is like what size they are. And of course, because this is audio, we're not seeing all the columns. So I want to see size. But for example, here are some songs that are, I'll just hover here. That's a almost 6-minute song, but this is a wave file that's uncompressed. Look at the size of that file. That's 59 megabytes. That means if somebody's listening on their phone, you're burning their data, right? So this is why you don't want to do it to people. You don't want to load full res audio. And yes, that would sound way better. The bit rate's higher, the quality of the samples is higher, etc. Right? But you don't technically want to do that to people, right? So finally, okay, so you have your main file, which I recommend should be an MP3. You have your fallback file, which is a good idea, but I'm also going to say probably not so necessary these days as it used to be, because most of our browsers support the formats. And then you can also use the other approach, which is just to provide a link. So for example, if they're using an ancient browser that doesn't have a built-in audio player, you just give them the link instead. The link won't appear unless these fail to load. Now, this approach is a good one, right? But I tend to stay away from this approach because I think it's frankly too complicated. There's a stripped down approach for doing audio that I prefer. So I'm going to show that to you. And if you look in the core shell, all right, so I'm going to go back to the core shell here in Brightspace, and we are going to go to unit 7. I have a little entry in here somewhere. Oh, I guess I don't. All right. And I apologize. I thought I had my little how to do multimedia shortcut thing. And so if you guys can just bear with me here, I'm going to actually pull it up from Blackboard, which is kind of fun to watch as a old course delivery mechanism. I'm trying to see when I taught web programming last on there. You guys should be thankful that you're not using it. So I might actually copy some of this content over. But this is the format that I'm speaking of. So this is the approach I'm going to use. Is I'm going to use the audio tag, but I'm going to embed the file directly in the control. I'm going to make sure it has controls, and I'm going to autoplay it, which typically I don't recommend. But you'll notice in between the audio tags, what do we put in there? We put in the message that the user will see if their browser doesn't support it. So this is the technique I'm going to follow right now. So back over to Dreamweaver, and I'm going to invoke the audio tag. I'm going to use the SRC like we do for images. And then we're going to go to the media folder. I'm going to pull in that Radiohead song that I was listening to on the way home. And then we'll do controls and the dreaded autoplay. You notice how I said that, right? Because it's considered in some capacities a no-no. In between the audio tags, I'm adding paragraph tags, and I'm going to just put in whatever error message I want to display if the audio doesn't load. So it'll be something simple like the one I had as an example. This browser does not support this audio file. And then if you want to be polite, you can say, consider downloading Chrome or Edge or whatever, you know. All right. But I'm just going to leave it at that. All right. I'm going to save my work, flip back over to the browser, and then I'm going to reload my media page. And remember, I triggered the little switch that says autoplay, right? So check it out. The green plastic watering can. I do have controls, right? I do have the player, it's right on the screen. But here's the caution with autoplay, and I say this very politely. Like some people go, autoplay, that's cool. So when somebody comes to my website, I can just play music. Have you ever, and I'm going to say this like for those of you that work like in an office environment, have you ever been somewhere and you like load up a web page, you know, and then all of a sudden like the music's blaring, like you didn't even do anything? And like in a workplace especially, that can be very embarrassing, or heck, even socially that can be pretty embarrassing because you might be pretending to check your messages but really you're watching videos or whatever. Autoplay is a feature I actually recommend that you don't use typically, right? There are some circumstances where it can work. I'm going to revise it to remove the autoplay. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a couple of line breaks here just to move that player down a little bit on the screen. So I'm saving. All right. And now I'm refreshing. So there's the audio player, right? And I'm going to go ahead and get the link. Right. Here the green plastic board. You'll also notice that the standard controls are all here. Now, if somebody wanted to download this, you'll notice that that's not available here, right? While with the link it is. Now, I'm not sure if you want people coming to your web page, listening to your music and downloading it for free. It might not be the thing you want to do. But having the ability, for example, like if you were a podcaster and you could load up your podcasts on your web page and people could just go right to your web page to listen to the podcast instead of like iTunes or iHeartRadio or whatever format you use, then you can push your advertising to them and keep them on your website spending their hard-earned money with their credit card on your products or whatever you're pitching. So I think this is actually a pretty cool tool considering it's built right into the browser. Right. The other one that we're going to do next is we're going to start talking about video, right? So it is possible to put video on your web page too. And ever since HTML5, once again, they've added a video tag. And much like the audio tag, right? And once again, I'm going to zoom out on this a little bit so it sits better on the screen. And then normally we would see it like this, right? Same basic approach though, folks. The approach is you put in your video tag. You put in your source file. I'm trying to get these two aligned, but maybe that's a useless attempt. And then whatever file you're trying to play, right? Typically, I would recommend the MP4 format for web. That seems to be the most universally compliant. But you can have your main file, your fallback file, and a link. So like we did with the audio file, I can just create a link to a video and it'll load up in a separate window with the player. I am going to skip that approach though. And then I'm going to use that one that I had in my Blackboard shell from, gosh, wherever the heck that was right here. And I'm basically going to use this approach that you see here, right? And I want you to notice some of the features here. So we have the source, we have what we call a poster attribute. And this is where you can put in a screenshot of what you want the video window to show before the video plays. That's what that is. So you can have a custom image if you want, or you can just eliminate that and it'll load up with the first frame of the video. Then you can also declare the size, the width and the height of your video. With this, you have to be really, really careful. And I say this very sincerely, because as with an image, you can contort your videos if you don't set it to the right aspect ratio. So what I recommend is that you look at the details of your video and figure out what the aspect ratio is. If you're not sure, don't touch it. Or here's a better trick that I use a lot is I'll just set the width to what I want it to be, and then the height will auto scale, right? And that's probably the better way. A couple little attributes that you can add also is you can tell it to preload. So in other words, if you don't put this in here, the video will not load up in the browser until the person hits play. And then we're relying on the download speed of the internet connection that you have to show the video. If you do preload, it will preload a certain percent of it before they even hit play, right? That's the advantage, and it makes for better video playback. And then you can also add controls, which we typically want, and you can set it up to loop. So you can have the video play and then play again and then play again, if you wish, right? I think that one's a little obnoxious, frankly. Right. So this is the technique I'm going to follow. But once again, I'm in a little conundrum here. I need a video to play. Okay, so like, where do you get videos from? Well, you can either create them, right? Or you can borrow them, right? And once again, I just want to keep you in your mind here. Like, I forget which of these projects I think has a like video files in it, but you can go into it. I think it's Pacific Trails, maybe.
Quick,
you can tell I
question.
don't. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, are you able to copy and paste a link from YouTube? Is that a
You are.
possibility?
And that's where we're leading to.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And what you'll discover is for videos, I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to provide for you here is if you're looking for a video you can just play with, you can go to the Pacific Trail zip file and pull down the Pacific MP4. I'm just going to play it really quick so you can see it. Right. Even has video and audio or whatever in it. This is the video, right? Provided by the author. It's a very, very small, low-res video, so it might not be a bad one to use, at least to try it out. Ultimately, if you're into creating digital content, or like if you shoot video with your phone, you could potentially shoot video with your phone, download it off your phone and put it on your website. That's totally doable, right? But you got to watch that file format real closely when you're doing that. Right, so let me go ahead and demonstrate adding a video, but I need to find one to add here. And I have a goofy one I can add. All right, so I'm going to go to one of my folders here. And I don't want to spend a lot of time. I have some good ones I could use, but I'm just trying to be mindful of our time here as much as anything else. I actually have a Zoom background that's a video, so I'm going to copy it. And I don't know if I ever showed this to you guys, but you're going to see it in all its glory in just moments, by the way. So I'm going to go back to my media folder and paste in that video. Now, this video here, I want to look at the size of it. I'm going to hover. It's 35 seconds long, right? It's copied off of a bad digital download of an old movie, so it's not super high res. And just this 35-second snippet is 45 megabytes, right? And this here embodies one of the main problems that we have with putting videos in our websites, and that is disk space. So on Prometheus, for example, we don't have unlimited disk space. We have a limited amount. So if you, like, for example, grab a bunch of like 4K movies and drop them in your folder and think you're going to stream them over the web, you're going to be filling up our hard drive. And guess what we're going to do as administrators? We're going to find those files and delete them. Right. So if you do put any video files on the server, I kindly ask that you make them as small as possible. You know, and I would say cap it out at like 50 meg. But I would ask even smaller if you could. Right. Okay. So there's the file. Right. I'm going to right click, select all, copy the file name. And then I'm going to go back to Dreamweaver here, and now I'm going to add a video file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple line breaks again, just to push the content down. I'm going to add the video tag, but do it correctly. There we go. I'm going to put in my source, and that's in my media folder, and it's an MP4. Probably not a bad idea to put a title on it. It's not 100% necessary, by the way. I'm going to have you guess what the title is. And then we want controls, and preload is recommended. All right, we'll close the video tag. And once again, in between the video tags, you want to put the message that appears if the video doesn't load, which would be something like your browser sucks. No, your browser needs updating, or download a better browser. I really the correct thing to say is something like that, right? So I could probably just copy that message and just change it from audio to video. I think it's probably a good choice. So here we go. That's spelled with an E. All right, so saving. And now I'm going to go back to my browser and refresh again, folks. So here we go. There's the refresh. Now, notice how that loaded up pretty large. I did not set, you guys notice I didn't set any sizes on this. I did that with intent, right? Before I hit the play button, by the way, I want to go back to my file folder and hover. And notice it'll tell me some basic information, but if I right click and do properties, this should tell me the resolution, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe it doesn't. Okay, maybe they just don't give you that information anymore. But they do show some of the stuff. It's 24 frames a second, the data rate. Oh, no, it is listed. So the frame width is 1280 and the frame height is 766. That's the native size of the video, right? If I wanted to downscale it and not skew it, I would want to take those numbers, and if I cut them in half, for example, I would want to make sure I cut both of them in half. So 1280 and 766. And here's what I'm going to do here, so I don't forget this. I'm going to put them in a comment. So 1280 by 766. And I'm just doing that for my own reference, right? So if I do want to scale it, which I'm going to do after I play it, you can see what it looks like. So once again, saving, back to the browser, and refresh. It really shouldn't change. All right. And then I'm going to hit the play button. All right. And I'm going to let it play as I kind of talk over it. There is audio here, but it's probably really, really quiet. This is the opening scene of a pretty famous movie, right? And I'm not trying to steal its content, but I'm just saying this is just for demonstration purposes, right? To show you that if you have access to video files, right? You guys recognize it now? Nobody? Right? This is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And if you've never seen it, I'm obliging you to watch it now, right? One of the best comedy movies ever. Now you notice I didn't put the loop command in there. We do have all our controls. We have our timeline. We have a volume control. I can make it full screen if I wish, right, etc. And it's got this extra little thing here where I can do picture in picture or adjust my playback speed. And these controls are automatic in the browser. If I wanted to adjust the size of this, so once again, remember I grabbed those settings there. I would use my calculator to do some math here. So for example, if I wanted half as big, I would take 1280, divide by 2, and I have 640. So I would say width equals 640. And then if I want to control the height, I want to make sure it's proportional. I don't want my math to be off, right? So I'm just setting it up there. I just got to figure out what half of 766 is, which is 383, right? So I would put 383 here. Saving, back to the browser and refreshing. And there it is at a much smaller size. Pretty cool, right? Now, it does not change, even though I made it smaller, it doesn't change the size of the file I'm dealing with. But here is your example of adding a video to a website. Now, I think what would be a good thing to do right now is we should take a break for a few minutes. And then when we come back, I'll show you really the better way to do a video on a web page. So 5-minute break, folks. All right, we are back from break and I'm going to continue on with this video stuff now. And I know that I just showed you 2 different techniques for adding audio, right? And really 3 different techniques if you use the fallbacks. And kind of the same with the video. We saw the fallback approach and then what I would consider is the more standard approach, which is the one I'm showing here. But there's another approach that we probably shouldn't ignore, because it's probably really truly the best way to put video on a website. And that is, hey, you know what? Content is out on YouTube, right? And YouTube is arguably the world's best video streaming platform for especially independent content. And anybody that has a Google account or a Gmail account or any of those, you know, even your school accounts here, right, are Gmail accounts. You also have access to YouTube and your own YouTube channel, right? And I don't think a lot of people realize that. But you can publish content to that. But, you know, if that's not something you want to do, I totally get it. Why would you publish to YouTube over using just like putting stuff on your webpage? Well, here's one of the reasons. When we looked at the size of those files, I mean, this was just a 35-second snippet, not even high res, of a part of a movie, and that was 45 megabytes. And if I download like super high quality movie, you know, as I've been saying, like 4K, 5.1 audio, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they get to be many, many gigabytes of data. And when you look at hosting plans and what hosting plans cost and how much, like, for example, how many movies can you store on a hosting plan? I'm going to tell you it's not many, right? Because the disk space on the servers costs money. And if you use a lot of disk space on a server, it gets really expensive to pay for web hosting. Okay, so what are your options? Well, what most, you know, video authors will typically do in that scenario is they turn to services like, for example, Vimeo, right? And if you guys are not familiar with this one, I'm just bringing it up first because I think a lot of people ignore this one, but this is a pretty important one. And a lot of independent video producers like this is a better platform than YouTube for promoting stuff. So you can upload, you create an account here, upload your stuff and share it with the world, right? And there's no cost to it, by the way. But from a more practical sense, most of us tend to use YouTube often on a daily basis, right? If you start thinking about it. And you can see I have like a whole bunch of stuff up here. I do, like for this class, for example, I take all the videos that I create for this class and I publish them here on my channel. So this is my channel content. You can see I've been amassing a pretty large library of videos. In fact, I'm not sure how many there are total, but it's many, right? And every week I'm adding probably a half dozen videos to my channel. Once they're uploaded to YouTube, in order to share them with the world, all you need is a link to the video. So for example, I can get a shareable link, right? But you know what? Let's actually go look at the video. I'm just going to pull it up on screen here because this might happen to you. You might be like watching. Welcome everybody. We're going to a video on YouTube, and you're like, man, I'd love to put that on my webpage, right? And this happens a lot. And so if you were interested in trying to do that, the way that you do it is you basically go down to the share button here, right? If there's a download, I mean, it is possible for you to download the file if that's showing up on the screen. Most video producers don't allow for this, right? They don't want people downloading the content and having a high quality version of it, right? But if you click the share link, they'll give you a bunch of different ways to add it. Well, the one thing that they give you, is usually the link. So like if you were, you're on Facebook or whatever, and you want to share a YouTube video, if you have the link to the video, you just paste it in there and it does the rest automatically. But for web developers, what we want is actually the embed code, right? Is this option here. So you click that, and then it will give you some code that you just simply copy and then add to your code. It's really that simple, right? All right, so I'm just grabbing the code as YouTube gave it to me. And heck, you don't even need to know what it means, right? But you will learn to know what it means. And there it is on my webpage. I'm just going to go show you that it's going to work, right? So I'm going to go back to the web browser now. If I can find it, there it is. And I'm going to refresh my page. You'll see the YouTube video loading up. All right. And I am playing it. All right. Now, this is really
Welcome,
kind of
everybody.
We're going to be, all right, not like you want to watch a different class's content, right? But if you are interested in programming to C#, you could watch that. But I want to have you notice a couple of things that if you notice, this is using now not the video controls that come in HTML5, but the video controls that YouTube provides, including their closed captioning, all their settings controls. You can go full screen on it, or you can click and actually go to YouTube and watch. Everybody, we're going to be working, right? But in essence, when we are working with what we call iframe code, right? And I'm highlighting the tags here, iframe. iframe is a way to inject content onto a web page from a different web page. So really what we're doing here is we're taking a part of our page and we're creating a little window, and we're allowing YouTube to put their content in that little window. That's actually what's happening. The video is not part of your file system. You're not going to upload it to Prometheus. You just simply are linking to it. All the settings that you see inside here, the width, the height, the source, right? All the stuff in here was generated by YouTube. I just copied the code and pasted it in. And for most circumstances, this will be fine, right? So this is probably the preferred way to really publish videos these days. So you don't put it on your own website in your own files. You upload the stuff to YouTube on your own channel. Then you get the embed link and drop it on your page.
Does file size matter at that point?
Juan, that was the next thing I was going to say. You almost stole it right out of my mouth. No, it does not. Like YouTube, I mean, Google's got plenty of servers and plenty of server spaces, right? And basically you can upload anything you want, right? They used to have some caps, and this is kind of interesting. Like, and I don't know when they changed this. This is a few years ago. But a while back when we would do this, they would cap you at videos that were, I think, like, I don't know, 20 minutes long or an hour long or something like that, because they didn't want to burn up all their server space. That apparently that's changed. You can upload full high-res video, and then their player automatically downscales it to whatever resolution it needs to be. So, and think of the other positive here. If you're paying for hosting and you have a cap on your storage, putting it on YouTube is smart, right? Because I can probably upload higher quality video, and then YouTube itself travels with an audience, right? So I have for example, a list of videos here that I have for my students, right? And you'll notice I make most of my videos are public, so the whole world can see them, right? I know from the hits I get, it's probably just my students looking, but check this out. I have one that here, like my Python class, my chapter 5 exercises, I don't have 200 students in my class. So, I have like 20 students or 24 students in my class. The rest of them are just coming in from the internet, right? And the other thing that happens, of course, with YouTube is if you have a channel, you reach 1,000 subscribers or more, you can start to monetize your content if you're a creator. But the other advantage is people can find it here, and all the tools that are available to YouTube are available to you. And then you can just simply, drop the stuff on your own page and it works. You do have to be cautious though, right? And this is kind of where we go in the PowerPoint next, because when you start grabbing audio and video that is copyrighted material that people like, it's their intellectual property, right? And I'm putting it on my webpage and then I'm monetizing it, well, that is highly illegal, right? Now, we get a little bit of a pass here in this class because I'm putting music and, well, the videos I'm putting out there, okay, it's a snippet of Monty Python. It's not the whole movie. I'm sure they've made their money on it. The YouTube video is my video, so I'm not stealing anything. The Radiohead song is not my song, but I'm using it for educational example. Is the polite way to say it. So I'm not really trying to make money off of it. However, if I got an email from, Radiohead's lawyers, I would have to remove that from my webpage, right? The general rule of thumb is don't put other people's content on your website unless you have gotten permission to do so. Now, if you're really in a pinch hunting for audio and video content to put on your website, I'm going to take you to this website. We've looked at this before, called the Internet Archive. So you go to archive.org, right? And here they have tons of free video and audio available for the download. So you can download it from here. I think you can also, and I'm just like grabbing something goofy here. All right, so you have like, goofy videos like these. I don't even know what these videos are, but I'm just going to click into one so you can see. But they will give you, you can check it out. That's kind of neat, right? They will give you the code, the way that you can download it, and the code to embed it here. So, for example, if I want to share it, they'll give you the iframe code, right? So I'm going to grab this iframe code. Or if you want, you could also download it and add it to your file structure. I wouldn't recommend that, but whatever's on that website is considered Creative Commons or open source. There's no copyright on it. Anybody can grab it and use it any way they want, right? So I think that that's really kind of cool, right? I'm going to go back and refresh again here on my own page, wherever that is, right there. So now you're going to see another video up here at the bottom here, right? And this comes from the Internet Archive. All right, whatever. There it is, right? Another way to get stuff on your webpage, that's video. They also have lots of audio stuff there too. Very interesting site to explore, by the way. All right, so that's kind of my thing on that. Don't steal other people's stuff. If you are a content creator, you would like to earn money off of the stuff you've created. And unfortunately, in this world of streaming, a lot of artists don't earn a lot of money. So I'm not a big fan of stealing content, by the way, not at all. All right. Some tips, right? When you are putting multimedia on a web page, you have a lot of stuff to really kind of consider. They suggest, as a good practice, especially for accessibility, is to, if you have audio files with words in it, to provide transcripts or captions, right? I have, one of the reasons I started using YouTube as a platform for my course materials is because when I upload my videos here, they automatically close caption. And here's the cool part about it. I didn't type any of that in. I just uploaded the video and Google's magic YouTube engine or whatever adds the closed captioning. And if you watch this, I mean, I'm teaching like a programming class, right? And you can see how many times I say too, which is kind of interesting. I'm trying not to say it right now, but it's very accurate, right? And if I'm publishing videos for students, this is actually required by federal law that it's closed captioned. And I think that's really pretty neat, right? That it happens automatically. So provide alternates for people. And if possible, like if you have words in your video and you can download the transcript, that's the thing you can do too. And I want you to notice here that if I click download, I can grab the whole video, but I can also somewhere here, and I'm not sure where you get it. I think here, somewhere here, you can grab the transcript for it too. And I'm not finding it quickly, but whatever. There is a way you can download the transcript for a video file, and maybe it's off the closed captioning control. Yeah, there you go. Nope. Anyhow, there is a way to do it. I just don't find it off the top of my head. If one of you guys thinks of it, let me know, and I will share it with everybody. All right, let's move on to some other topics here. Let's try to hit the rest of the slides in the chapter. For majority of the rest of the stuff that we're going to do here tonight, there's some stuff I'm going to demonstrate, some stuff I'm not going to demonstrate because I don't necessarily consider it vital to what you guys are learning at the moment. One really neat little trick that a lot of people like to do on websites, by the way, is when you have a website that starts getting complicated and you have a menu structure where the menu might have sub-menu items, we call these drop-down menus. And this is kind of a slick little trick. There is the possibility that you can create this with CSS, by the way. In the old days, we used to use JavaScript mostly to do this, but CSS is capable of it now. But notice they give you some basic tips on how to make this happen. And I'm not going to do a walkthrough on how to do this, but if you do, there's one of our case studies, I think, and I forget which one it is that has this kind of built into it. But it gives you the basic approach. You create a nav container with position relative. You create a sub menu using ULs and LIs. I'm not a huge fan of doing that, by the way. And then you tell the internal submenu to initially not display. So you set the display of it to none, and then you can force it back onto the page using absolute positioning, either when people click or hover, right? And these are goofy little things. A lot of times when we see these types of menus on a website, I'm going to be real frank with you, people are not hand coding them. They're using an engine like WordPress or Drupal that allows you to create complicated menu structures, and the drop downs happen automatically. So I know very few coders these days that are really hand coding this stuff. I learned how to do it the manual way, and man, is it a pain, right? But when you learn how to do it, it's actually kind of neat. Another one that actually is kind of a helpful little property, kind of a weird one, actually, is the transform property for CSS. And this allows you to do like all these like weird little actions. Like, for example, rotate, scale, make things bigger or smaller, skew, like stretch it, or move something on the screen, right? One of the easiest ones to try in here is really the rotate one. So I think that's kind of a one that we could play with here for a second. So I'm going to just copy their code, right? And I'm going to add it to my CSS file. What I need to do, though, actually first is figure out where am I going to apply this? The media page is probably not the spot. How about we go back to the home page where I have a couple of images, and wouldn't it be fun to rotate Homer? I think Homer would be a good rotate object, right? So I'm going to go to my index page, find the code for Homer. So let's do that. We're going to go to the index page. I'm going to find my Homer Simpson code here. Here he is, right? So in order to control Homer with CSS, I probably want to add either a class or an ID to it. I think I'm going to go with an ID, and I'm just going to call it, I think Homer is probably the thing to call it. Oh, and I see that something else must be called Homer on the page. let's just call it homey. How about that? Right. That's one of those like, yeah, we'll call it homey. We'll just go with that. Saving the index page. Now I'm going to jump over to my CSS, and I'm going to probably go way down towards the bottom here. Maybe right next to my Homer ID. And we are going to create a new style. This is a class. No, this is an ID. So we're doing a pound sign, and we're doing homey. Right. I'm just going to drop in that code that I borrowed. So we're going to tell it to transform and rotate 3 degrees. So it's going to take that image and turn it clockwise 3 degrees, right? Keeping in mind, straight up is 0 degrees, straight down is 180. So I can take something and make it upside down. Or if I set it to 90, I can turn it on its side. Or if I go to 270, it's on the other side, right? And you can put it anywhere from 0 to 360 degrees. We're just going to rotate 3 degrees on this image. So let's go back to the browser and take a look. Oh, and it didn't work. All right, let's see why. Make sure I named everything correctly. And I'm wondering if it's because it's an animated GIF. It could be. So I'm going to check my page source here and just make sure my code actually reloaded. Yeah, the ID is in there. You see it, right? I'll check my CSS. Did my CSS travel to the browser? Yeah, it looks like it did. So it should be working in principle. Let's try putting that on a different image. So let's go back to the browser and just take a really quick look here to see. Why don't we try this image here, right? Which is the one right above Homer. So I'm going to go back to my source code here. Yeah, so this is the one that we're looking at. I am going to give this image an ID. And we'll call it Sky. How about that? That's a pretty good name. So I'm going to save this. And something here is throwing an error. Duplicate of attribute name ID was found. I'm assuming it refers to this. Does that take care of it? Oh, I see. It wants an alt attribute. Got it. That's kind of another little thing here. So images require alt attributes. All right. So that image is okay now. But we're working with this ID. So back over to CSS. I'm just going to change this to Sky. Saving. Back to the browser to check. And there's the rotation. Did you see it? Right. So a goofy little effect, right? But under the right circumstances, I think that could be nicely applied. Now you can play with all the other settings that they talk about in Transform. That's a pretty simple one for creating a little bit of pizzazz, basically is a polite way to say it. There's another interesting property in CSS, and I do want to kind of like let you guys know here that all the stuff that we're seeing here in this chapter is heavily focusing upon all the stuff that HTML5 added to the HTML paradigm, by the way. This one here is kind of an interesting one because the transition property allows for what I call animation, basically. It's one aspect of animation. So here's the effect that they're trying to achieve. When they're going to their menu, they're hovering over the menu item. And as they hover, they transition the background color over 2 seconds in a linear fashion. So they're changing the background color as you hover. So apparently the hover effect gives you the background color, but the transition option in the CSS makes the color change over a 2-second time period instead of having it be automatic. So this is kind of an interesting thought. Now, is there somewhere that I could apply this where I'm already doing a transition, like a hover effect? And I do have hover effects in my menu. So let's just take a look at that really quick. So if I find my nav here in the CSS, notice I'm doing a hover and I have a color for the font, right? And right now my background is black, right? So what if I set a background color, and I'm not promising this is going to be pretty, by the way. I'm just going to set it to aquamarine because it's sitting there. And then I'm going to paste in the transition effect for the background color to happen over that 2-second linear time frame. So let's go take a look at this and you'll see what's created here. This is kind of weird. So watch what happens with my menu items now. See the background kind of fade in. Kind of neat, actually, right? I'm not saying it's the prettiest thing. Like I would totally tweak and adjust this, but you know, it is transitioning. And okay, this is just one example of what you can do with this, because at the moment, what I'm transitioning is the background color, but I could apply that, for example, instead of applying it to the background color, I could just apply it to the color of the font. So I'm just going to strike those two things and save it. We're going to refresh again. And now the change of the menu item is transitioning, just the font color, right? So that's kind of a weird approach. I think I like the background one better. So I'm just going to Control Z here and go back. But basically, because this effect is happening relative to an action on the screen, right? And this is a pseudo selector for hovering over an object. These don't happen until I'm hovering, but then I can make the change happen over a period of time, right? All right, so that's the transition effect. I think that's kind of a neat one, actually, right? It I can think of a few ways you could use it, and I'm not like coercing a way to use it, but just my simple example, I should refresh with the background, right? Pretty nifty. Another thing that we do a lot when we're putting web pages together, and a really, really common feature is to have an image gallery, right? And what they're showing you here, and this is what I'm not demonstrating, by the way, is if you wanted to create an image gallery such as the one that you see here, where you have thumbnails of the images, and then as you hover over the image slowly fades in. They're giving you all the code for it right here. So they show you how to put a gallery together. So they're doing it with list items, by the way, which is a little weird, but it's a thing, right? And then they are putting transition effects in, right? So they start opacity and they transition in the opacity and they ease in and they ease out. So this is kind of a neat little gallery effect if you want to play with it. I'll let you guys experiment with that on your own. I once created one of the first professional websites I created. I did a gallery very much like this, and I was so proud of myself, right? Because it was a really kind of neat little effect. You know, and I didn't have a lot of images in the gallery. It was maybe like 8-10 images, something like that. But the people that I made the website for, which was a nonprofit organization here in Milwaukee, they were delighted with it. It was like they never seen anything like that before. And all I did was like copy the code from a website. Basically, I was like, hey, how did they do that? Oh, hey, I'll figure it out. I figured it out, put it on the website. They loved it to pieces. Right. All right. Another weird thing that CSS now does is the fact that you can do animations with CSS, right? Now animations really does go down a pretty deep rabbit hole, but I'll have you guys remember that one website that we went to really early on, the CSS Zen Garden. You guys remember this, right? And there was this one CSS site that, notice how like stuff is like moving. This is not JavaScript, by the way. This is all done with CSS. And then as you move around the screen, the objects like move and transform. And by the way, the rotation of the sign is askew, right? The moving up and down is an animation technically. When you learn about animations, and I'm not here to kind of teach you how to do multimedia authoring from scratch, but animations typically happen over a timeline. And we use things called keyframes to trigger the animations to happen. And it is kind of its own field of study. So we're just kind of like mentioning here that this is available in CSS. So if you want to walk that path and figure out this really advanced feature, there's lots of really good tutorials and information. W3 Schools has some pretty decent stuff on it that allows you to kind of delve into this category. It is a rabbit hole though, so fair warning. Like if you're like trying to animate stuff on your screen, you might be spending days and hours doing it, and I won't give you any extra credit for it because I'm not requiring it. By the way, right? So play with this in the future is kind of a thing. It is really important to note though, like that website, right? Like this one here. In the old days, when we would do effects like this, usually we would have to rely on a technology called Flash to do it, which was an Adobe programming environment that allowed us to author multimedia content on a timeline and program code behind it. And then we'd have to embed a container on our screen, not supported by all browsers, to get really fancy stuff like this to happen, right? The fact that we can now do it with CSS, that's why Flash is no longer used, if you guys are even familiar with that technology. But important to mention for sure. HTML has a couple of new tags too that we're going to talk about that were added with HTML5. There's the details and the summary elements, and we typically use these together to configure some interactivity. So I'm going to show you kind of how this one works, right? Basically, the details in the summary tag allow you to create these like lists, basically, where you get these little arrows and stuff. And then when you click the arrow, it expands and shows you the content. That's kind of a neat little trick. If you want to learn how to code that, once again, I'm not requiring this technique. You can go to W3 Schools. And I'm not sure if we can get to where they would have that here, if they even have it directly listed. But I think if I type in details, summary, I'll probably pull it up, the summary tag, the detail tag. And so this is basically how it works. So here's an example of the code. And you know what? I can do it under Try It Editor, but I'm just going to drop it on my page. What the heck, right? Easy enough to do. Make sure you save your CSS code. But we want this. I'm going to put this on the media page, right? I'll put it below my fancy videos, right? And yeah, that stuff all needs to be indented. But normally when we do this, I kind of do it like this, details tag like that, summary tag like this. Okay, so watch what this does. This is actually pretty slick. I think this is a nice effect for a website. Probably here. All right, so we're going to go to the media page, and then at the bottom, right, I have my little box. I click it, and it shows stuff. Now, the question you should ask yourself is, what can I put inside there? Does it have to just be words? No, you could put videos in here. You could put pictures in here. You could put any HTML thing can go here, right? The only part that's really required, right? Details makes the thing work. Summary is what you see before you click the arrow. And then anything that follows is anything you want to put on the page. Right. So for example, like Juan, you're building a Detroit Lions page, right? You could list your players and you could hit the box and the box could expand. You could have a picture of the guy and his bio, right? Just as an example.
Yeah.
Right. And that way you could list all the players on the team in one concise list. and you don't have to look at their stuff unless you want to.
Pretty sweet.
So I get, yeah, that's a really cool new tag that they have. Once again, in the old days when we would do this, we would use JavaScript to do this, right? Now it's just built into HTML5. Wonderful. Thank you, HTML5. All right. We are going to talk a little bit about Netscape here before we wrap up. We got a precious few minutes, and I'm going to try to hit as much of this content as I can. Since we are going to do a whole chapter on JavaScript, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it right now. But basically, JavaScript is the third key language of the web. The three key languages are HTML, right, structuring content, CSS for appearance and what do we call it, behaviors, like animations and rotations and stuff. And then JavaScript is the programming language, which actually makes our web pages do stuff aside from just sit there, right? It is a programming language that operates inside your web browser. It is not compiled, it's interpreted, meaning it's just a set of instructions, and when it hits your browser, the instructions execute, right? What do we use JavaScript for? So traditionally, we use it for a lot of the stuff that you see here, like put pop-ups on the screen. That's how your pop-ups happen, by the way. To do like drop-down menus, or to validate information on a form, or propagate new windows. That's kind of weird. Or to create rollover effects, or status messages, or to reach into your system and display the date, or do crazy things like math or other programming tasks. So when you think about like all the stuff you learn in your programming classes, like if you have Python or Java that you're taking, like any of the kind of programs that you write there, you could write in JavaScript and make them work in your web browser. Weird. One of the things that makes JavaScript work is this thing called the document object model, which basically takes all of your web page content and breaks it down in a hierarchy of objects. And I'm going to, before I show you the next slide, like for example, if I'm on my web page and I right click and I go into inspect mode, right? This view up at the top, which shows basically like a rough outline of my HTML. Notice little arrows, right? Now we know how they do those. And notice how I can expand in here, but all of these objects that are in here and have arrows next to them are part of the document object model in a hierarchy, right? So now when I go back to the slide, this will make a little more sense, I hope, right? So when we load up our browser, we have the browser window, right? And then the part that we've been focusing on is creating the web page documents, right? So the document itself is in the hierarchy. And then we might create like anchor tags, which are links or forms or images or paragraphs or whatever, right? Those would all appear. Here's things. And like, for example, an image would include a source file, that kind of thing, right? So there's a hierarchy of the objects on the screen. Any of the objects that we can see here in the hierarchy as tags or whatever, those are all controllable by JavaScript. And JavaScript uses this document object model as its kind of structural reference point, So for example, what that means is, so I could write JavaScript code to adjust my links or my forms or my images. Yeah. And anything else on this list. So it extends beyond the document itself, but I can also do things like I can have JavaScript look at my link history or the history in my browser and take me back a couple clicks. Or I can look at the location of the URL or generate a new location. So I can go to a web page, and the moment a person lands there, I can move the person to a different web page. That's called a redirect, by the way. Right. So for example, when I'm like creating an object, could you imagine if you like hovered over an object and then that would trigger JavaScript to run, that would take you to a different web page? Yeah, you can do that with JavaScript. You totally can. You can also dig into the browser, and in the DOM, we call that the navigator. So I can probe a user's browser as they visit my website and read what browser they're using, what operating system they're using, which version of the browser they're using, all of that, right? And sometimes that's useful information. Why? Well, if a person's visiting your website with Safari on a Macintosh, maybe that doesn't look the same as it does in Chrome. So I can probe and see, hey, are they using Safari on a Macintosh? Well, if they're using Safari on a Macintosh, give them this code instead, that kind of thing, right? It's also used for statistics tracking, by the way, even when they do that. There's some other languages that are kind of affiliated with JavaScript and a couple technologies, really. One is called Ajax, and this one's actually kind of losing favor a little bit, but this is what we call asynchronous JavaScript combined with XML. It allows us to kind of use all these technologies that are listed here in kind of very unique ways. So, like, for example, Ajax is one of the technologies that Google used really early on when they developed like Google Docs and their email platform that worked inside the browser. So, for example, I'm very quickly going to load up my email here, like you guys want to look at it. But here's my school email account. And if I click into, and I'm going to click into like an ad here, here's an ad, okay? And I click in here, you probably don't notice this, but when I clicked into that email, all this part of the screen, the top, the sidebar, the right sidebar, none of that changed. All that changed was the center part of the screen. So the page didn't reload, but I clicked on something and something else loaded. That was done using asynchronous technology. So when I clicked on that link, it told Google server, hey, please load up that email message. So go into the server, retrieve the message, and loaded it on my screen without changing the other framework of the page. Okay, why would you do that? Well, isn't it inefficient if you go to a website and every time you click a link that all the content has to be refreshed when I don't need it to be? Because in my email program, I'm just looking, all right, I'm just loading up a new message. I don't have to reload this stuff. I just want the stuff here to change, right? So that's basically what that technology brings to the table. It's a very primitive example. Another really important thing that's happened in JavaScript is what we call JavaScript libraries and frameworks. And one of the first and most notable of all the JavaScript frameworks is this technology called jQuery, which was basically a shortcut way to write JavaScript code that would allow you to do these crazy effects without really needing to know how to write the JavaScript code to do it. This technology was developed by Google, by the way, another one of those things. And it does like such really cool things with a small amount of code. One of the tricks to it is that it uses CSS selectors to select the objects on the screen. And then you can like do simple things like show, hide, move, whatever. You can do all these really crazy, simple effects. jQuery is so standard as a JavaScript library. A lot of people don't think of it as jQuery anymore. They just think of it as part of JavaScript. The truth is you do need to load libraries or attach to online libraries to make it work. But it does do really cool things like make really easy slideshows and stuff like that. All right. When we started introducing HTML5 traveled with a bunch of new technology. And I'm going to hit these as fast as I can here. Your knowledge of these will really be expanded when you take the advanced programming or web programming class, right? Where you start to hit upon these things. But basically, HTML5 included into it a lot of things that never were there before in HTML. Audio and video are great examples, right? Because in the old days, man, when we wanted to do audio and video, it was like pulling teeth. People had to have the right browsers, the right plugins. You had to write like goofy code for different browsers, and half the time it didn't work anyhow. And what they did with HTML5 is they added all these really cool and important features. One is geolocation. So this allows you, like, for example, and maybe I should say this first, have you ever gone to a web page, either on your phone or your browser, and it says, hey, so-and-so wants to know your location. Do you want to allow this or block it? Right? Have you ever got one of those? That's HTML5 geolocation happening. So in other words, the website is requesting to know your location so that it can give you different content on the screen based on where you are. So for example, if I'm sitting in Racine and I Google pizza, it's going to give me pizza places in Racine. How does it do that? Well, because it knows where I'm located. If I don't allow them to know my location, it might give me pizza in New York City. You know, that's one of the features of it. The geolocation is so powerful that it can actually locate you on the web, where you're located, and sometimes even the location of the building where you're sitting, you know, depending on, you know, the network you're connected to. Another thing that's new for HTML5 is this web storage thing. It allows us to actually store stuff locally on the user's computer. And I think this limit has changed, but when they first introduced it, I think it was a 5 meg limit. And I think they've kind of expanded that now to a higher storage amount, but don't quote me on that. This also allows you to store what we call session objects. So in other words, like when you are logging into something or signing out, that is tracked basically on your local computer often. So like, for example, you might be using your Gmail, you just close your browser and step away, turn off the computer, come back, turn it back on, go to Gmail again, and you're not logging in because you were already logged in, right? How does that happen? Session storage, by the way. All right. They also have this really kind of weird thing, right? Which is a progressive web application. So in other words, they can push stuff to your computer to run an app, but only when you're online. That's what this one is. It travels with a bunch of different things. Once again, I call this a very complicated feature, not for intro level courses like this, but you're being made aware of it at this point. When you propagate apps like that, apps usually travel with a manifest, meaning kind of a list of all the stuff that comes with the apps, and that's propagated to the person's device. So like if you're running an app in a browser and the user goes to that app all the time, and I'll just use a really goofy example like Wordle. Does anybody play Wordle? You know, I do every day, right? That happens like that. How does your browser on your phone know that you've got a 10-day streak going, or how many times you've won or lost or guessed it in 3 guesses or 2 guesses? It's because it's all stored. The manifest helps that to happen. We also have service workers, which allows JavaScript to perform actions in the background that you're not aware of, but you know, it's some of the magic of the web, right? Like if you are, let's say, on a social media website and somebody posts a comment about you or something, how does it work that it just pops up? You know, it's stuff that's happening in the background. Some of that stuff is done with server workers API. The other element that's probably maybe one of the more exciting pieces is this thing called Canvas, which creates a container on any web page where you can inject, like we used to do with Flash, programmable content. So it's a weird amalgamation of HTML, JavaScript, and using what we call the Canvas API. And a lot of the web-based games that you guys play are built using Canvas. Canvas in and of itself, there's like books like 3 inches thick written on this topic, right? And a lot of people who do browser-based gaming design use this tool, by the way. All right. One last slide and we're calling it a night. You know, whenever you are working with any of these advanced features, right, you always have to keep accessibility in mind. When you use some of the advanced APIs that come with HTML5, most all of them are driven with JavaScript, and users do have the option in their browser to turn JavaScript off. And there are those people that are paranoid enough that do that, right? Turning it off makes most modern dynamic websites basically unusable, by the way. And a lot of websites will not work unless JavaScript is turned on. So, this is, I consider it kind of a moot point. But they do suggest that you follow these basic accessibility techniques here. They also, and this one I do think is important. Like if you were, for example, to create navigation that's really fancy and it's done with images and JavaScript and drop downs and all that, what happens if the stuff doesn't load? How do you get people to go from page to page? It's not a bad idea to provide secondary navigation. What a lot of people do on websites these days is they'll, like in the footer at the very bottom of the page, they'll put a link to all the pages that they have, just in case the menu up top isn't working correctly. Right. A real good use case scenario for this is like when you're on mobile and the menus switch from being like a horizontal nav bar to the little hamburger menu they have to click on to expand. Like if that doesn't load, how are you getting people around your website? Providing links at the bottom is sometimes a good way to do it. All right, folks, I have run out of time here. We have covered all the slides though.